Hi there, and continuing the series on books about knife fighting and the training for the knife fight. We come to a book by a figure who was a noted researcher in all forms of close combat, and excuse me, we previously reviewed his book, The Quick and the Dead, which was close quarter shooting history, and he similarly has done a book about knife fighting, and it's this book, The Complete Book of Knife Fighting by William L. Cassidy. And as I say, Mr. Cassidy was a very, very noted and able researcher, lots of very good sources within the community, and the book does reflect this. Like several of the books, it starts with the history, and he identifies two main strands of interest. One is what he terms the commando school, which comes from W.E. Fairbairn through Applegate, and the other is what he terms the saber school, which comes from A.J. Biddle via Stiers. And he goes into quite a bit of detail on this, and the influence of those two schools can't really be overestimated. He then goes into the early history of the knife as an adjunct to other weapons, mainly the sword, and there's some reproduced photographs and diagrams from some of the old manuals from the Renaissance schools and so on. Very detailed history and very interesting. Goes into various knives for the task, some production knives, custom knives, push daggers, boot knives, and mentions switchblades as well, what we call flick knives over here. Another section of the book goes into the sources of techniques, and he talks about the Western schools, which basically all came from fencing, dueling, and that kind of thing. He goes into the New Orleans schools, which the blade was taught to a very high level, and then other systems since then. He then looks at the East, and his main or only really source is the Japanese, Kenjutsu, which is the sword, and Iaido, which is the fast draw of the sword. And we might, in hindsight, notice the lack of any reference to the Filipino schools, which is something we will be coming on to. Now, the book is the complete book of knife fighting, so we haven't really got into techniques yet, but he goes into the techniques, and in this he really parallels David Steele's book, which we reviewed previously, and it's the grip, the stance. Most of these books really are quite insistent on particular grips and the minutiae of holding a knife in a particular way. Stance, there can be discussion about which is the best stance, but anybody with a background in any kind of active movement, and particularly in martial arts, will understand stance fairly well. The main contention with the knife is, do you have the knife forward and your other hand back, or do you have the other hand forward and the knife back? And there's pros and cons of that, depending on what school you go to. One of the techniques which I did find very interesting in this book, and the detail was pretty good, was on the hand cut. But I'll just get to the part here. Describing the hand cut in some detail, and it's something that was taught by Biddle, and it really is, you might say, a classic technique of the knife. He then goes on to what he terms the slash, or the what we might term snap cuts, and now this is a fast sequence in the book, taken with a motor drive camera, so you can't really tell much from it. However, it looks like it's done at a fair speed, which is what's required. To my mind, and it's just my opinion, it's a bit overextended. That the art of the snap cut and the snap thrust, which we will probably talk about in other books that discuss it, doesn't have to overextend and compromise your balance. However, lots of different things can work. I would also mention another book that Mr. Cassidy wrote, and this is the basic manual of knife fighting, and in a way it's just some of the stuff from the first book taken in very, very simple form. Diagrams rather than photographs. The grips and all that kind of stuff goes in there. Out of the two, I don't think there's much value in getting this one when you can have this one, because there is a lot of very interesting information. A lot of it is to do with the general area around knife fighting, the selection of the weapon and that kind of thing, and the history, rather than the tactics and techniques. But there is quite a bit on that as well. And as I say, Mr. Cassidy was a noted researcher, and he made a really good contribution here. Evaluating between this and David Steele's book, I'd probably go for Cassidy's book, although they are quite similar in scope.